You can barely float, fat black girl. You'll drown if you enter the water. If you've ever judged someone by how they look, this story will make you question everything. Because what you're about to read isn't just about swimming, it's about every time we've looked at someone and decided they didn't belong before giving them a chance. It's about the cost of our assumptions and the power of one person's refusal to accept them. So before you scroll past, before you move on to something easier, stay with this. Stay with Ava. Because her story might just change the way you see the world and yourself. The words hung in the chlorine-thick air of the Riverside Aquatic Center like a curse, ugly and deliberate, meant to wound. Ava Robinson stood frozen on the wet tile deck, her worn duffel bag slipping from her shoulder, her breath catching somewhere between her chest and her throat. The laughter that followed the insult was immediate and vicious, a cascade of cruel amusement that bounced off the glass windows and concrete walls, multiplying until it felt like the entire building was laughing at her. She was 16 years old, 5'4", with deep brown skin that glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, a soft round belly that her mother called beautiful but the world called wrong, and thick thighs that had carried her through countless laps but were now being measured only by their size. Her swimsuit was a plain navy one-piece from Target, stretched tight across her curves, and suddenly it felt like it was made of tissue paper, offering no protection from the dozens of eyes that raked over her body with judgment and disgust. The boy who had spoken was named Tyler Hendricks, 17 years old, with the kind of lean, muscled body that came from a lifetime of privilege. Private swim clubs, personal coaches, a family that could afford everything he needed to succeed. His blonde hair was still wet from warm-up laps, slicked back from his angular face, and his blue eyes sparkled with the particular cruelty of someone who had never been told no, never been made to feel less than, never been denied a space he wanted to occupy. He stood surrounded by his teammates, all of them white, all of them laughing, all of them wearing matching warm-up suits with their club's logo embroidered on the chest. They looked like they belonged here. They looked like champions. Ava, with her borrowed goggles and second-hand gear, looked like an intruder. Seriously, what is she even doing here? A girl named Madison said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She had that casually pretty look of someone who had never had to work for approval, clear skin, perfectly straight teeth, a body that fit every societal standard of beauty. This is the state tryouts for the Junior Olympics, not the YMCA community swim. More laughter rippled through the group of 30 or so teenagers gathered for the tryout session. This was the qualifying competition that would determine which swimmers would represent their state at the Children's Junior Olympics, the most prestigious youth swimming competition in the country. Every kid here had been training for years, had devoted their childhoods to perfecting their strokes, had sacrificed normal teenage experiences for the chance to stand on a podium and hear their national anthem play. The pressure was immense, the competition brutal, and the standards unforgiving. Into this environment, Ava had walked with nothing but her dream and her determination, and now both were being publicly shredded. Coach Richard Brennan, a 48-year-old former collegiate swimmer with sun-damaged skin and a whistle perpetually hanging from his neck, approached Ava with slow, measured steps. His eyes moved over her body in a way that made her skin crawl, not with sexual intent, but with barely concealed contempt. He looked at her the way someone might look at a lost dog that had wandered into a fancy restaurant, with pity mixed with irritation. When he spoke, his voice carried that particular tone of false kindness that people use when they're about to deliver cruelty disguised as concern. "Look, sweetie," he said, stopping a few feet away from her and crossing his arms over his chest. "I admire your confidence, I really do. But you have to understand, these tryouts are for elite-level swimmers. Kids who've been competing at regional and national levels for years. I've reviewed the registration list, and I don't see any competitive times listed for you. No club affiliations, no previous meet results, nothing." He paused, letting his words sink in, his eyes once again traveling down her body in that assessing way. "And to be perfectly honest, swimming at this level requires a certain body type. It's not about discrimination. It's just biomechanics. Athletes at this tier need to be lean, streamlined. It's basic physics." Ava felt her face grow hot, felt tears prickling behind her eyes, felt her stomach twist with humiliation so profound it was almost physical pain. She wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, wanted to tell them all about the hours she'd spent at the public pool 3 blocks from her apartment, about how her uncle Marcus had been a Division II swimmer before a shoulder injury ended his career and how he'd been coaching her since she was 7 years old, about how she'd been clocking times at the public pool that were faster than half the kids standing here mocking her. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was too tight, her shame too heavy, her sense of not belonging too overwhelming. "She probably thinks because it's in the water, People won't notice how fat she is, another voice called out, followed by snorts of laughter. Like it's going to hide all that. Can black people even swim? Someone else asked in a stage whisper. I thought that was like not their thing. The racist stereotype hung in the air like poison, and Ava felt something crack inside her chest. This wasn't just about her body. This wasn't just about her not having the right equipment or the right background. This was about her skin, her race, her very existence in a space that had been historically denied to people who looked like her. Swimming pools in America had a dark history. They'd been sites of segregation, of violence against black people who dared to integrate them, of systemic exclusion that still echoed in the present day. Even now, black children were statistically far less likely to learn to swim than white children, a disparity rooted in decades of discriminatory access to pools and swimming instruction. Ava knew this history. She carried it in her bones, and now she was living it. She turned to leave, her vision blurring with unshed tears, her hands trembling as she reached for her duffel bag. She would go home, she would tell her mother that the tryouts were canceled, she would never speak of this humiliation again. She would forget about the Junior Olympics, forget about proving that a black girl from a low-income neighborhood could swim with the best of them, forget about the dream that had sustained her through years of early morning practices and late-night training sessions. She would just forget. Stop right there. The voice was firm, clear, and absolutely authoritative. It cut through the laughter and the cruel whispers like a knife through butter, silencing the pool deck instantly. Ava turned, along with everyone else, to see a woman descending the metal stairs from the observation office that overlooked the pool. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Hartman, and she was the owner and director of the Riverside Aquatic Center, a woman in her mid-60s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun, warm brown skin that spoke to her own African-American heritage, and eyes that had witnessed too much injustice in her lifetime to tolerate it in her facility. She moved across the deck with purpose, her sensible flats making soft squeaking sounds on the wet tile, her simple burgundy dress and cardigan giving her an air of dignified professionalism. When she reached the group, she didn't raise her voice, but somehow her words carried to every corner of the space. I've been watching and listening from my office, she said, her gaze sweeping over the gathered swimmers and landing pointedly on Coach Brennan. And what I've witnessed in the last 5 minutes is absolutely unacceptable. This is a public facility hosting a state-sanctioned tryout, which means every registered participant has the legal and ethical right to compete. Period. No exceptions based on appearance, race, size, or any other discriminatory factor. Coach Brennan's face flushed red. Mrs. Hartman, with all due respect, I'm trying to run a professional tryout here. I have standards to maintain. Standards? Mrs. Hartman's voice sharpened. Let me tell you about standards, Richard. The standard here is fairness. The standard here is giving every child who worked up the courage to walk through those doors a fair shot at their dream. The standard here is not allowing racial slurs and body shaming in my facility. She turned to Ava, her expression softening. Baby, what's your name? Ava, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ava Robinson. Ava Robinson, Mrs. Hartman repeated, as if committing it to memory. Did you register for these tryouts? Ava nodded, pulling the crumpled confirmation email from her bag with shaking hands. Mrs. Hartman took it, examined it, then handed it back. Then you swim. That's all there is to it. She looked back at Coach Brennan. She swims, Richard. And if you have a problem with that, I'll be making some calls to the state athletic board about the conduct happening under your supervision. The threat hung in the air, unambiguous and powerful. Coach Brennan's jaw worked, his face cycling through several shades of red before he finally nodded stiffly. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Everyone in the pool. Time trials. Freestyle. 200 meters. Let's see what you've all got. Mrs. Hartman gave Ava a small, encouraging nod before turning and walking back toward her office. In that brief exchange, she had given Ava something precious. Not permission to swim, because Ava had always had that right, but the courage to claim it. As the older woman's footsteps faded, Ava felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, the humiliation still burning in her chest, but underneath it was something else now, a spark of defiance, of anger, of determination. They had tried to make her small. They had tried to send her away, but she was still here, and she was going to swim. The other competitors were already entering the pool, diving in with practiced grace, their bodies cutting through the water like knives. Ava walked to the starting block assigned to lane 7, the furthest from the coach's observation point, the lane typically reserved for the slowest swimmers. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers that hadn't completely stopped. could sense the mix of curiosity and schadenfreude in the air. They wanted to see her fail. They wanted to be proven right. They wanted confirmation that she didn't belong. She pulled her goggles over her eyes, the elastic strap digging into her scalp. She stretched her arms above her head, feeling her shoulders pop, feeling her muscles warm and ready despite the emotional exhaustion. In her mind, she heard her uncle's voice from 1,000 training sessions. The water doesn't lie, Ava. It doesn't care about anything except how hard you work and how much heart you bring. Everything else is just noise. She climbed onto the starting block, her toes curling over the edge, her body coiled and ready. The coach blew his whistle and without hesitation, Ava dove. The world transformed the instant she entered the water. The harsh lights, the cruel laughter, the judging eyes, all of it vanished, replaced by the cool, embracing silence of the pool. Underwater, there was only the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and strong, and the muffled rush of water flowing past her ears. She surfaced and began to swim, her arms pulling through the water with long, powerful strokes, her legs kicking with explosive force, her body finding the rhythm that had been ingrained through years of practice. Each breath was controlled, each turn was tight and efficient, each movement was purposeful. She wasn't thinking anymore. She wasn't feeling the fear or the shame. She was just swimming, just moving, just being. From the deck, the change in atmosphere was palpable. The whispers stopped. The smirks faded. People began to notice that the girl in lane 7, the girl they had mocked and dismissed, was moving through the water with startling speed and grace. Her technique was textbook perfect. High elbow catch, strong pull-through, explosive kicks that sent small waves rippling across adjacent lanes. By the time she hit the 100-meter mark, she had pulled ahead of half the field. By 150 meters, she was neck and neck with the leaders. And as she approached the final wall, she unleashed a final burst of speed that left everyone else behind. Her hand slammed into the timing pad at the 200-meter mark, and she surfaced, gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled off her goggles and looked around, disoriented, unsure of what had just happened. The pool was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The silence of shock, of disbelief, of assumptions being violently dismantled. Coach Brennan stood at the edge of the pool, staring at his stopwatch like it had personally betrayed him. He looked at it, then at Ava, then back at the stopwatch. He pressed buttons, shook it, looked at it again. Finally, in a voice that was almost inaudible, he said, 2 minutes, 8.3 seconds. The number meant nothing to most of the observers, but to anyone who knew competitive swimming, it was remarkable. It was a time that would qualify for state championships. It was a time that would earn scholarship attention from college coaches. It was a time that was faster than everyone else in the pool by a margin of several seconds. It was, in short, proof that Ava Robinson belonged here, had always belonged here, and that every assumption made about her had been catastrophically wrong. Tyler Hendricks, the boy who had first insulted her, stood with his mouth literally hanging open, water dripping from his hair onto the deck. Madison, the pretty girl who had questioned Ava's presence, looked like she'd been slapped. The other swimmers were staring at Ava with expressions ranging from shock to respect to something that might have been shame. And Coach Brennan, for perhaps the first time in his life, appeared genuinely speechless. Ava pulled herself out of the pool, her body heavy with exhaustion but her spirit soaring. Water streamed from her hair and body, pooling at her feet as she stood there, breathing hard, her chest heaving. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The water had spoken for her, just like her mother had said it would. The rest of the tryouts proceeded in a strange, subdued atmosphere. Ava competed in 2 more events, backstroke and butterfly, and while her times in those weren't as dominant as her freestyle, they were still competitive, still impressive, still undeniable. By the time the final results were posted 3 hours later, Ava's name appeared in the top 5 qualifiers in 3 different events. She had earned her spot on the state team. She would be going to the Junior Olympics. And according to the historical records that Mrs. Hartman pulled from the facility's archives, Ava was the first black girl and the first plus-size athlete to make the state team in the program's 40-year history. The weight of that achievement was overwhelming. As Ava sat in the locker room afterward, still in her damp swimsuit, she felt tears finally come. Not tears of shame this time, but tears of relief, of vindication, of pure exhaustion. She had done it. Despite everything, she had actually done it. This was her story now, the story of a black girl swimmer who refused to let prejudice define her limits, who proved that excellence had nothing to do with skin color or body size. A soft knock on the locker room door interrupted her moment. "Ava? It's Mrs. Hartman. Can I come in?" "Yes, ma'am," Ava called out, quickly wiping her eyes. The older woman entered, carrying 2 bottles of water and a gentle smile. She sat down on the bench beside Ava and handed her a bottle. For a moment, they just sat in comfortable silence, 2 black women separated by generations but connected by the shared experience of having to prove themselves in spaces that weren't designed for them. "You know," Mrs. Hartman said eventually, "I opened this facility 30 years ago. Back then, people told me there was no market for a black-owned aquatic center in this neighborhood. They said black folks didn't swim, didn't care about swimming, wouldn't support the business. I proved them wrong just like you proved those kids wrong today. Why did you help me?" Ava asked quietly. "You didn't have to step in." Mrs. Hartman looked at her with eyes that held decades of wisdom and pain. "Baby, I stepped in because 40 years ago I was you. Different pool, different faces, same ugly words. And nobody stepped in for me. I let them chase me away and I've regretted it every day since. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself in my own facility." They sat together for a while longer, talking about swimming and dreams and the burden of being first. Eventually, Ava changed into her street clothes, packed up her things, and walked out to find her mother waiting in the parking lot. When she told her mother what had happened, both the horrible beginning and the triumphant end, her mother pulled her into a fierce hug and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud." The next several weeks were a whirlwind. Word of Ava's performance spread quickly through swimming circles, then jumped to social media where her story resonated with thousands of people who had experienced similar discrimination. News outlets picked up the inspirational story about racism in sports and overcoming prejudice through sheer determination. She was interviewed by local television stations, featured in online magazines focused on black excellence and body positivity, and invited to speak at schools and community centers about her experience. The Junior Olympics themselves were held at a massive facility in another state, and competing there was both terrifying and exhilarating. Ava didn't win gold. She finished with a bronze medal in the 200-meter freestyle and just missed the podium in her other events. But standing there with that medal around her neck, representing her state, proving that she belonged on that national stage, felt like the greatest victory of her life. What Ava didn't expect was the impact her story would have on others. In the months following the Junior Olympics, she received hundreds of messages from young black girls, from plus-sized children, from anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong in sports or in spaces where their bodies or their skin made them stand out. They thanked her for being visible, for being brave, for showing them that their dreams were valid. She became a symbol of what was possible when you refused to accept other people's limitations. One letter in particular stayed with Ava. It arrived 6 months after the tryouts, in a plain white envelope with careful handwriting on the front. Inside was a single page, and the signature at the bottom made her breath catch. Coach Richard Brennan. "Dear Ava," it read. "I'm writing this letter because I owe you an apology that's long overdue. What I did at those tryouts, my words, my assumptions, my failure to stop others from mocking you, was inexcusable. I told myself I was upholding standards, but I was really just upholding my own prejudices and insecurities. Watching you swim that day shattered every assumption I'd built my coaching philosophy on. You showed me that I'd been measuring talent by all the wrong metrics, that I'd been letting my biases prevent me from seeing greatness in people who didn't fit my narrow definition of what an athlete should look like. Since that day, I've been working with the state athletic board to create more inclusive recruitment programs and to address the barriers that keep kids like you out of competitive swimming. I've also been doing the hard personal work of confronting my own racism and bias. This isn't about seeking your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. This is just to say that you changed my life by refusing to accept my judgment. You made me a better coach and, I hope, a better person. Thank you for that, and I'm sorry it took your extraordinary courage to teach me what I should have known all along. With respect and regret, Coach Brennan." Ava read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: anger at what she'd endured, gratification at his acknowledgement, and hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd helped shift something larger than just one man's perspective. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. But she kept the letter, tucked it into her scrapbook alongside her medal and newspaper clippings and photos from the Junior Olympics, because it was part of her story too. The part about how sometimes, when you stand firm in your truth, you don't just change your own life, you change the people around you. Ava continued swimming through high school, her times improving with each season, her confidence growing along with her skill. She received scholarship offers from several colleges and eventually accepted a full ride to a Division I university. She never forgot that day at the tryouts, never forgot the sound of those cruel words or the feeling of wanting to disappear. But she also never forgot the moment she hit the water, the moment everything else fell away and it was just her and her strength and her refusal to quit. That moment defined her, not because of the pain that preceded it, but because of the power she discovered within it. Years later, Ava would go on to coach young swimmers herself, and she made it her mission to create the kind of inclusive, supportive environment she'd wished for as a teenager. She particularly sought out kids who didn't fit the traditional athlete mold, kids of color, plus-size kids, kids from low-income backgrounds, and worked to ensure they had access to quality instruction and competition opportunities. She remembered what Mrs. Hartman had done for her and tried to pay it forward, to be the person who stood up and said, "Let her swim," for the next generation of dreamers. Looking back, Ava often thought about that opening line, the words that were meant to destroy her. "You can barely float, fat black girl, you'll drown if you enter the water." Those words had been designed to make her small, to make her leave, to make her believe she was less than. Instead, they became the fuel that ignited her fire. They became the before in her story, the darkness that made her light shine brighter. They became proof that other people's hate cannot determine your destiny, only your response to it can. If you ever laughed at someone who didn't look like they belonged, maybe it's time to think about Ava. Think about the dreams you might have crushed with your assumptions. Think about the greatness you might have missed because you were too busy judging appearances. Because the truth that Ava learned that day, and that the world is slowly learning, is this: talent doesn't have a size, excellence doesn't have a color, and belonging isn't something others can grant or deny, it's something you claim for yourself. Your body is not a barrier to your dreams. Your skin is not a limitation on your potential. The only real obstacle is believing the lies that others tell about you, accepting their boundaries as your own, letting their fear become your reality. Ava refused to do that. She walked into that pool deck carrying nothing but her dream, and she walked out carrying proof that she belonged. That's not just an inspirational story about overcoming racism and body shaming. That's a blueprint for survival and success in a world that will constantly tell you that you're not enough. If this story touched your heart, share it, not just online but in real life. Tell it to your children, to your friends, to anyone who needs to hear that no insult can define their destiny. Because somewhere right now, there's another Ava standing at the edge of a pool, a stage, a classroom, or a dream, hearing voices that say she doesn't belong. And she needs to know that those voices are liars, that her worth isn't up for debate, and that the water, or whatever her passion may be, is waiting for her, ready to prove everyone wrong.